quilting friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today we're doing clue 10 of the Cotton Cuts Puzzle Mystery Quilt. This is Olympia. If you've been following along for So Sweet, the bear cloth, that's a different quilt. This is the final clue for So Sweet Olympia, clue 10. We're going to get started. If you haven't looked at any of your stuff from them and you don't want me to spoil anything, pause this video now, go do what you need to do, and then come back so I can show you how it all comes together. Now, this is the final clue, so I will be putting it all together, and it is a throw size quilt, which is a little bit bigger than my workspace, so it's going to be a little entertaining to see how I get this all done in my filming space. I don't normally do projects this big in this studio space, but the rest of my studio is not set up for filming right now, so we're just gonna see what we can do about making this work. You ready? Let's get started. Okay, so just like normal, we have our clue. Unlike normal, our clue is 4 pages long, so it is a lot of stuff's going on, right? But just like normal, the first part says what's in our pack. So this is our clue 10 pack. We can go ahead and open that up, and we can double check to make sure we have everything in there that we need and identify what's what. So I can throw this away. Totally made it. Okay, so I have some squares. I have some strips. I'm going to be pressing these in a minute. Just get out any folds or creases, make it just a little bit easier, nicer, smoother to work with. Those are also some squares. Those look the same size. All right, so give me a minute while I lay this all out and get this sorted. So this is my coordinating fabric for the binding. It says there's enough to cut 6 strips of binding up to 2.5 inches wide. I love that they didn't cut the binding already. I love cutting my binding at 2 inches. I know some people like 2 1/4 and some people like 2 1/2, so that they gave us the fabric and let us cut it ourselves. Like, I know this is all a pre-cut kit and we haven't had to cut anything ourselves before, but rather than dictate to us, you are going to use 2 1/2 inch binding when I don't like that size binding. I love that they gave us that option, so that's perfect. I also love that the border strips have all been cut longer than they're needed, and we're going to be cutting these down to the size that we need. So I'm going to be teaching you some things about putting on border strips when we put this all together. So I have my binding fabric. I'm going to toss that aside, and I'm going to go ahead and press all my pieces and kind of lay them out a little bit so I know which is which and what's what. And then we're going to get started with getting all my clues and figuring out, these are like all my past clues, and figuring out where they all go to put it all together. Oh, and there's a little pack of cards in here. I'm pretty sure that's a pack of cards. I almost grabbed my sewing scissors to open it up. Oh, how fun are these? These are Cotton Cuts branded cards. Very pretty. Okay, so we can put the plain cards away. Okay, so I ironed everything out. Looks like I have fabric C, and then off camera over here I have some E strips, and then I've got my big E strips hanging over here to kind of trying to keep them unwrinkled. So that is my first sheet. So, yep, 4 different E's, 2 C's, and then a square C for those. So this layout shows me a little bit of how it all comes together, but there's a lot going on there. So I'm just going to follow the step-by-step instructions. And each month I went ahead and put my pieces in the clue piece that they are. So that should make it pretty easy to find them, to put everything together. So it says 1B above section 3 and 1A above section 8 as shown, and make 2 of each. So I'm going to sort through my pieces. So I have 2 1Bs and 2 1As, and this will be a fun time to find out if I did something wrong, but none of y'all left me any comments saying that I did anything wrong, and I'm hoping y'all would have caught it, so we'll see. And then I need sections 3 and 8. So these are sections 3. And that's all section 3, so I'm going to pull that out and not confuse myself. And then section 8. Both of these are section 8. I can pull those out. And again, not confuse myself. Stay. Don't fall, please. Okay. There we go. Now some of these are a little bit slightly creased, folded, wrinkled. It doesn't hurt to give them a nice quick press. Okay, so I'm going to lay these out. This is my 8, and this is my 1A. And these two are my 3 and my 1B. So I'm stacking them on top of each other just for saving space. If that's confusing, don't do it. Turn on my sewing machine. And we're going to stitch. When we stitch these, you can look for spots where you can take your seam allowances and nest them, and you can right there. So we're going to do that as we stitch these together. So I went ahead and chain piece these, which means stitching one after the other. So I'm just going to use my little blade on the side of my machine to clip these. If you don't have a machine that has a little blade on the side, you can purchase little clippers like this. And let's see, for both of them, they're getting pressed from the smaller piece to the bigger piece. So that's easy. And I say for both, but that's for all 4. So there's 2 of 2 different kinds of blocks. Just go ahead and press. And I'm just laying one on top of the other. It's okay. Now, how do I know which of these to stack on top of one another since I've mixed everything up? It's because these gifts are in the top right corner, or they may be on the bottom left. I'll have to look on the fabric C. Yeah, fabric C is in the top right and top left corners. You can, oh, grab the wrong sheets. There we go. So fabric C is up in these corners, and the rest is all fabric A. So that's how I know these are laid out correctly. And I'm going to grab section 1C, and there should be 2 of those to be able to put these pieces together. So let me go ahead and grab, these are 1C, and I already grabbed my 1As and 1Bs. So that's it for all the clue 1 pieces. I'm going to do the same as before and give these a quick press before sewing them all together. And just to double check, if you look, there's A and fabric C, and so the fabric C is going to the bottom. So I've got C's in the corners and C's on the bottoms of these. And I'm going to stitch my stars together. So this on one side and then the other on the other side, but I'll do the one sides and then I'll do the other sides and then I'll press. Again, nest any seams that you can. Okay, so I'm not pressing between the steps. I'm just gonna go ahead and lay these out and I'm gonna stitch the other side. So I have these stitched. I need to go ahead and press the seams in. And I'm already looking ahead at my next instructions while I press, because if I wasn't hanging out and doing this with you, I would probably be watching a show on like Netflix or Hulu, maybe HBO. I'd be watching something. And since I'm not doing that and distracting myself with a show, I'm looking ahead. So these, what we've just created, these are the step 2 units, because we're on step 2 of this multi-step process of putting these quilts together. Right, that's pressed. I'm just gonna throw it over my machine. So step 3 says to join the step 2 units, to the top and bottom of section 4A with the C squares in the outer corners. So we're watching those C squares. And after that, we're going to put on our first set of borders, which is going to be measuring. Okay, so C squares in the top corners, and I need to grab 4A. So step 4. Piece A, which is this right here. Okay. Again, it's been creased, it's been hanging out with all the other pieces. We'll give it a quick press. Move one out of the way. This is going to go down here on the bottom because my C's are in the top corners. My C's will be in the bottom corners here. Now, I'm not a big pinner, as you know, but I want to make sure that these points line up because this is the very center of our quilt, and I really want the very center to look cute. So I'm just putting a couple pins just at those seams, and that is going to hopefully keep that lined up. There we go. And I'm going to take this and do the same with this other side. Again, making sure these C corners are on the bottom. I've kind of squished that a little on my lap, so I'll have to press that out in a minute. I'm again going to line up these seams so I have a nice center square on my quilt. Okay. So these are getting pressed towards that middle strip. I'm looking at how I did on those center points. Not too bad, not too bad. Okay, so the next step is these E borders. And I don't know if they're counting these as the borders that they've cut longer than needed. So I'm going to double check, and the easiest way to double check, especially on a small area like this, is to fold this one in half and this one in half and check. If you have a larger surface, you don't have to fold them in half. You can just line them up against each other. But yep, that is definitely longer than needed. So here's what some people will do. They will just take this border, they will put it on the quilt, line up that edge, and then just sew all the way down and then cut off the excess. And you can do that. And what happens when you do that is you've got feed dogs on the bottom pulling it and a presser foot on the top pushing it down. And so things feed unevenly. And that's where you end up with like little wrinkles and puckers. And on a quilt that like is kind of going out like this, you'll end up with your outer borders ruffling. And if you ever go to a quilt show and you look at the bottom of quilts, if the quilts have a wave in the bottom, that is one of two reasons. Either when it was quilted, it needed to be blocked before being bound, or because of this. You have wavy borders from not cutting your borders to size and then easing them through the whole side of the quilt. You with me? If you're not, I'm going to show you how it's done. We're going to walk through the steps. I'm going to explain it again. So if you didn't catch that, you don't have to rewind and listen again. We're going to walk through it. Okay, so it wants us to do the side borders first. I don't know if it matters. But the sides are, yep, this side and this side. So what I do, because this is bigger than my mat here, is I fold it in half, just like this. And I'm not crease folding it. I'm just folding it because I don't need a crease that I'm gonna have to iron out. I'm gonna lay this on my mat here, and this looks like it is 13 1/4. I'm then going to measure the opposite side as well, because this sucker is supposed to be square when it's done. So let's measure this opposite side. It's also 13 1/4. So if my seams are not perfect, they're equally not perfect throughout the whole quilt, which is always good to know. Okay. So I want to make sure that I grab my 2 shorter pieces. There we go. And now I could say, okay, 13 1/2 is 20, or 13 1/4 is 26 1/2, and cut these to 26 1/2. But again, my mat that I'm cutting on here is not that big. So I'm not going to have to do the math. It's 13 1/4 on both of them. And I'm going to bring the fold all the way to 0. This is at 13 1/4. If I had a rotary cutter and a ruler nearby, I'd probably use those, but I can just cut parallel with this folded over piece. It was not a great cut. Apparently I can't cut parallel with a folded over piece. There we go. And that gives me 1 extra piece instead of two small extra pieces. If I just fold it in half, and cut it at 13 1/4, I'd end up with 2 little pieces. This at least is a little more usable. Like, this is big enough to be able to use on scrap tape. So, all right, throw that with scraps. Now, these ones, I am gonna fold with a little crease. And I'm going to pin. This time I am going to give this a little crease right at the top fold right there. Okay, so I can lay 1 border piece on here, line up the fold on this little border with the fold here. I'm going to go ahead and give that a pin, but I'm bringing it down just a touch. Just a touch. There we go, line that up better. And here's why. Right here, I have a piece where, yeah, I did something definitely imperfect here. I have this big, huge chunk, and if you're not precision piecing, which I wasn't here, these were all pre-cut pieces, none of it was starched. I was not squaring up as I went along, was not worried too much about like a scant 1/4 inch, and so you can have pieces like this, and when you have a big chunk like this, if I were to stitch right here, this will end up with a hole in my quilt. And that's going to be a problem. We don't want a hole in our quilt. Now, when I quilt, I over quilt my quilts. I quilt them really densely. So it's okay if some of my seam allowances are a little scant. I'm actually going to bring this down a little bit more. And that way, if you look, I'm going to split the difference on this seam. And so I'll have a good, I don't think it will quite be 1/8 of an inch, but I'll have a better amount of seam allowance there at this little spot. And if I bring this down a little bit here as well, I'll flip this over so we can take a look. I've kind of mitigated some of this big chunk right here. So I'll definitely have enough seam allowance here to make this work. And I'm going to add 1 more pin. No, that'll be okay. It should be fine. And I want to check this as I go to make sure that I haven't given myself no seam allowance at all, because that's terrible. I'm going to add a pin at the beginning and the end as well. And when I say we're going to ease our border, so our border piece is the same size as our quilt piece, because we measured them both and we cut, well, the quilt piece was 1 size and we measured the border piece and made sure it was the same size. But I want to make sure that they're kind of equal, there's an equal tension between the two as they're pinned across, especially since I did that right there. so that any extra, we don't call it stretching, we call it easing. We don't call it, you know, wiggly bits of fabric. We call it fullness. So any fullness in the fabric is eased across the entire seam. How's that for fancy language saying, it's a little wonky, so I'm gonna fudge it? Quilt language. I'm going to ease any fullness across the length of the seam. So now I have my pins. I'm going to take out that first pin. We don't sew over our pins. We just don't. We don't sew over our pins. And then we just make sure that everything lies smooth up until the next pin. When you get to that pin, you pull it out. Somehow I have a thread knot. I'm going to clip that. There we go. Then I want to make sure everything's smooth until the next pin. So all the way up to that next pin. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that one seam. Oh, I've got plenty of seam allowance there. This is getting pressed. Yes, it's getting pressed towards that border. We don't need to press it quite yet. We can do the opposite side. It's going to be the same thing. Grab our piece, find the middle, give a crease, find our piece of this, find the middle, give it a crease. Then pin. Make sure that we've identified any trouble spots and mitigated for those trouble spots. Sew, making sure not to sew over our pins. And then admire our work, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that for this opposite side. And then I'm going to press the seams towards the borders. And then I'm going to do the exact same steps that I've already done here for the other two sides. So measure, cut to length, and so on in this same method. And that way y'all don't need to watch putting on another set of borders when it's the exact same. So we're just gonna let you know that that step happened. And after this is on, we'll skip to page 3 of our instructions. So now I have this center done. Doesn't it look pretty with all the stars? And yes, I made sure that my C blocks were in the corners. So I've got C blocks here in the corners and then A in the outer corners. I'm going to take this and set it aside as we move on to page 3 of the instructions. There we go. Okay. Page 3 and then page 4 and we're done. So page 3 says it's the intermediate section, and then we still have the outer section. So the intermediate section says join section 2A to 2B, make 2 set aside, and 5A and 5B, and this is, then we're going to add 7, 6, and 9. Okay. So let's start by finding our section 2A and 2B. And that should be it for section 2 pieces. So we take those out of the box. Just like with all the other ones. Let's give this a press. Okay. And And I need to know which is my B fabric and my H fabric. So H is the trees. So that's down and on the end. And down and on this end. So this is the way these are coming together. So right sides together, 1/4 inch seam allowance, just stitch these up. And then the pressing is going that direction. So open both these up, pressing is going that direction. And then looking ahead, there we go. I need to 5A above 5B. So looks like these get set aside for a second. Trying to fix some of these press. There we go. Okay, so these are getting set aside for a second because it looks like these are these two sides right here. And now we're going to make these top and bottom border pieces. So I'm setting this aside, and I need to grab section 5A and 5B. So those are section 5. I have 5A and 5B. Perfect. So now these can be pressed. And remembering that H is our tree fabric. H is up, so H is up here, and H is down here. We're going to connect these. So as you sew these, I'm going to lay this way so it's all flat and smooth. I definitely don't have my 5A and my 5B the same length. So I'm going to find the middle of each. I mean, you can fold these in half, but also you can see where the middle would be on that one right there. And you can pin the middle. And this can happen because all of these pieces are straight pieced, all of these pieces are straight pieced, and all of these pieces have bias, and that bias can stretch and cause this to be a little longer. So I'm going to let it hang over just a little bit, and you can see I'm going to kind of add tension to ease that across. And that's how I'm going to sew it, is give it some tension to ease that in so I don't lose all my points. Your other option would be just to trim this the same length, but that drives me crazy. Easing it in means you'll have to be more careful when you quilt it to make sure that you don't get lumps and puckers. There we go, and these are getting pressed towards the triangle units. I popped that over. I could unpick it. Just going to give it a little clip. And then it'll lay flat for quilting. Or flat, mostly flat. Flat-ish. So I have my 5A over my 5B, and now I need to join section 7. Section 7 to step 6. So this is step 6. Section 7 is going to be my box. So section 7 and section 9. So let me grab those. So yes, I have 2 section 9 because one is going to go on either end. And then 2 section 7. My box is getting really empty. Getting closer. Okay. Let's give these a quick press. And are they identical? No, they're not. One has triangles on one side and squares on the other. This one has triangles on the side and squares on that side. So they are not identical. We're not going to mix them up. Okay. So triangles across the bottom, triangles across the bottom, triangles across the bottom. I'm going to attach these on this, and then those on the other side, and then we'll press. Okay, so I'm reading ahead on my instructions. It says we are going to join a step 5 unit to the left and right of the center section, and with the points of the B triangles facing inward. Then we're going to press those out. Then we're going to add these step 7 units to the top and bottom with the points. Let's see, sorry, I need to flip this so they can press this in. Let's see, with the points of the B triangles going in as well. And then we're going to do the C borders. And we're going to do the C borders the same way that we did the last set of borders, where we're going to measure before adding our borders. Okay. So I'm going to grab my center. I don't think it really matters, but our sides are the ones that have the shorter little border piece. And our H, which is our pine needles, are on the top and bottom. And we're going to add these the same way that we added all the borders, making sure to ease everything. The middle is pretty easy to find because it's where that seam is. And I still actually have the crease on my middle right here. So I can go ahead and pin those together and see how well this eases. So give it a little bit of tension. Come here. Kind of inch my way to that center and pin in the center. I'll go ahead and pin this again and pin the other side so you can see how I do this. So I have my middle pinned and my end pinned. Make sure it all gets laid out. Kind of pick where about my middle is. And it's better to do this on a flat surface, not a surface that's too different like this, but that's okay. Okay. With my pine triangles here, I can go ahead and pin this before I pin the middle. Now, if you want to be a little less fussy, we're not going to call it lazy, we're going to call it less fussy. If this is easing pretty easily, pretty well, you could just put this under the machine and ease it while you're sewing it. So I'll show how that works. Instead of pinning that middle bit, I'm stitching the first couple stitches. Then I'm easing and I'm grabbing the middle, so instead of it being pinned, it's just my fingers. And for someone who really doesn't want to pin, that's a little bit faster. But pinning is always going to be your more accurate. And we're just going to stitch on the other side, and then we get to pin on our top and bottom, which is our step 7 pieces. Okay, so these are getting pressed. Let's see. Yep, press to the outside. Okay, I have my right and left on. The top and bottom are identical, so it doesn't matter if I have it facing this direction or facing the other direction. And now triangles down. I'm going to add this on. I'm going to again find my middle, and pin. And I'm going to ease this piece on as well. And even if your two pieces are exactly the same length, you still want to pin at the different spots, the middle, the two ends, and then definitely, I mean, it's a good idea to pin between the two. And the reason is because you have feed dogs on the bottom and not on the top. And so the top and bottom can still feed differently. And as the pieces go through, the top and bottom can shift. And you can start off with them being the exact same size and end up with them not being the exact same size. And it'll drive you crazy. But if you pin along the way, you'll catch any of that natural shift and be able to just ease it in. So I'm going to stitch this side, and then I'm going to go in and stitch the bottom. Okay, so I've added step 7 to the top and bottom. I don't know if I'm missing where it says which way to press. I'm guessing that it would say press out because that's what it said everywhere else. But I'm going to go ahead and press in, and I'll tell you why. It's because between step 7 and the center is this border, and step 7 has all these triangles. And I know with these triangles, they had me press onto those triangles, but it's a lot of seams on top of one another. So I just want to press into this border, which I think is going to give me a lot less bulk when I go to quilt this, instead of pressing those triangle pieces on top of one another. But you could press out, and I think that would be fine as well. Both ways work. Now I am pressing this on my tiny little wool pressing mat. This is actually a medium size. It's a good size wool pressing mat. It's not that tiny. But this is not where you want to be pressing at this point. You want to take this over to your big ironing board and press it on your big ironing board. I just don't have a big ironing board that's going to fit in this area. I'd have to like take it up and down between every step. We're not going to do that today. So I'm just going to do what I can and press here, and my final press will be on my nice big ironing board, which has a bunch of stuff on it, so I'll clear that off. But okay, so here's where we're at. I'm taking a look between steps. I know you're looking from the front and I'm looking from the back, but I think we're doing pretty good. Okay. And now we're going to do our C pieces, We're gonna add the sides first and then the top and bottom, same way as before. Let's go ahead and measure. And if your measurements when you measure like this are different than mine, that's okay. Go with your measurements, don't go with mine. Here I get something like 22 and a half. Let me double check this. No, it's 22 and a quarter. Yep. So this is 22 and a quarter for me. Might be a little different for you. That's okay. I'm going to also measure the other side. By the way, if you have a difference between the top measurement and the bottom measurement, cut both at whatever is the middle. So this one's 22 and a quarter as well. So if you had one that was 20 and one that was 20 and a half, you cut them at 20 and a quarter. So 22 and a quarter. I'm going to take my shorter C pieces, which are these two. No, I'm wrong. I'm taking my longer C pieces because these are the sides. I tried to take my shorter C pieces and they weren't long enough. And for a minute there, I was a little panicked. Like, what did I do wrong? Did nothing wrong except grab the wrong pieces. Because the short ones are for top and bottom. This is for side and side. Yep, that's 22 and a quarter. So we're just going to go ahead and cut these the same size. And these are my two sides. This is my scrap. These are going to be my top and bottom. Let me set those aside for a minute. And now we're going to attach these the same way we've been attaching all other borders. This is the way that any quilt that's being built from the center out gets built. Phew. Okay, so we just finished round C. And this is where that puts us. So, I mean, you could stop right now and have a nice baby quilt. But I'm just kidding. We're not going to stop right now. Well, I mean, you could stop right now. You can hit pause. You can come back tomorrow or next weekend and finish it up. Because this has been a lot of sewing. This is the most sewing that we've done in 1 month on this project. So, it is a lot. And if you need to take a break, go ahead. If you're okay continuing on, do a quick bobbin check to see where you are at on your bobbin. Because you don't want to be sewing these really long seams and find out that you only had 6 inches worth of bobbin thread and you've been sewing with air thread for inches and inches and inches. So do a quick bobbin check before we go on. I'm going to set this aside because this is through C, border C. And so now we're going to create the next round, which is a piece round, and then we're going to add the last set of borders. So 2 more times round. And then we're done. We're getting there. Okay. Put you aside. Grab my box. It's the last time that I should be taking pieces out of here. So join to section 6 units. And that's the last of that. And then I have my 2 4B units. I'll set those aside. Empty. All done. That's all of those. Okay. So let's give these a quick press. Okay, so this. And I can double check that my fabrics, this should be G, yep, and this should be F. Perfect. So we'll sew these together. Let's see, both of these are getting pressed towards F, which is the pink. And then these are going to be the side pieces. So we can set these aside for a second. And go ahead and look at the next step, which is join 2 section 4B units as shown, and then add a C on each side. Okay. So these I can set aside for a second. These are my 4Bs. I should have 4 of them. Okay, so these are, oh no, I didn't attach my C squares to the sides. So let's go ahead and attach those C squares to all 4 sides. Okay, and these are getting pressed not towards the C, so away from the C squares. Okay, I'm going to change these pressing instructions for a second. I'm going to show you why. Because if I press these seams in, right, this border seam is also saying to press that in, like towards C. And that means that these seams and these seams are going to be pressed in the same direction. I don't want that. So I'm actually going to switch up these instructions, and I'm going to press my seams out towards C. And that's going to give us pieces to line up, things to nest, prettier cornerstones. And then once these are pressed, I can set this aside, and I'm going to go take our center, which is in the instructions called the intermediate unit, and add the sides. So these 2 pieces are getting set aside, and the other pieces that we have are going to get collected in just a sec. Okay, so these ones, oh, don't drop. I'm putting those way behind me so I don't confuse them with what I need to do. I'm going to grab these side units. And our quilt so far. And we're pinning the brightest colored triangles in. We're doing this the exact same way we've done all of our other border pieces. We are pinning each end and the middle, and then we're easing the rest so that it all comes together nicely. So the ends, I didn't need to fold this in the middle because there is a seam in the middle. Actually on both. No, yeah, no, there's not a seam on both. There we go. And as these get longer, if you want to do another pin halfway between, so instead of doing outside pins, middle pin, and then a middle pin between each of those, you can add 4 more pins between as you get longer and longer pieces. Whatever feels like it's going to give you the best results. grab these top and bottom borders, and we're doing the same thing that we have with pinning middle, ends. Yeah, we're doing, again, the colored triangles towards the body of the quilt. And then after this, we're just going to, and this one, we have a seam to nest right at that setting, that cornerstone. Sorry, I was calling it a setting triangle. It's not a setting triangle. It's a cornerstone. So let me show you on the other side. So here, where we have, there we go, this border piece coming up with this border piece, there's this cornerstone. And because we pressed this one towards the cornerstone and this one towards the body of the quilt, these seams nest. And so we don't want any easing here. We want this to line up, and that gives us a pretty cornerstone. So we want to pin here. And then we can find our middle and pin our middle. And then, yeah, we're gonna sew it the same way we have all the other ones. And then it's time to add our outer borders, which is our last set. So when I get to this point in a quilt, I start counting down the number of seams. So I have this top and bottom seam, and then I have the 4 seams of the outer border. So we're just 6 seams away from having this whole quilt done. And if it feels like a lot, it's a lot. It's a lot of piecing in one day. But not much cutting. We just were trimming up those border pieces. But we didn't have to cut the width of those border pieces. We just had to cut the length to make sure that it fit the size of our quilt. There we go. So these are going to get stitched, and then the seams are going to get pressed in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then meet you back here for those last outer borders. Okay, friends, one last bobbin check before we do these last seams, because you don't want to do these longest seams without checking those bobbins first. And we're doing our side seams first. I'm not going to do what I did last time, which is grab the short ones instead of grabbing the long ones, because those are our sides. And I think this may be longer than my mat at this point. So let's see. I don't know if this one will be long enough. I might not have grabbed one long enough. Line it up. Give myself those couple extra inches that I need. Okay, so I'm going to fold this in half. And I've added a little ruler here to give myself a little extra room. And now when I fold it in half, there's a seam allowance right here. I'm folding it on the seam allowance. So I want to measure from the stitch line out, not from the edge, but from the stitch line out. And that is, otherwise I'm going to be cutting my piece a 1/2 inch longer than I need to. So from my stitch line, I'm at 27 1/4. Perfect. Both sides measure at 27 1/4. Since both sides measure at 27 1/4, I can fold this right there. Let's double check. Yep, 27 1/4. So these are my long side pieces. I'm just going to cut these. That's my extra. Same process I've been doing the whole time. Okay, I have this pinned. I'm going to go get ahead and sew this. I'll do the other side, I'll do the top and bottom, and I will catch you when this is all put together. Whew. So I have pressed those last seams and it is all done. Look at that. So good, right? If there's any mistakes in this quilt, I don't see them. And I don't want to see them. And I think it's perfect. Are all my points exactly perfect? No, they're not exactly perfect. But if you go back to the first video, I said that this was my for fun quilt. It wasn't going to be a lot of stress. I wasn't going to freak out about little points and things. I didn't pre-starch all these fabrics. I wasn't squaring up as I went along. It was going to be okay. It was going to be fun. And it's totally okay and it's totally fun. Now I have just a couple things I need to do. I'm going to take this to the big ironing board, give it a good press, kind of mist it gently with spray starch. I'm not soaking it with spray starch. This isn't like my spray starch soaking technique. This is just misting it with spray starch to give it a little bit of stability. Go through, and there's like threads that need to be clipped, and those are just frayed threads or threads from stitching that need to just be clipped off, and I'll find those as I press, and I'll just go through and I'll clip those off so the front of my quilt top is nice and clean. Yeah, like these are stitching threads. So all this will get clipped off. And then I'll go through the back and make sure that all of my seams are pressed well on the back, that everything's nice and flat. It doesn't matter if this is going to a long armor or if I am quilting it myself. I want to make sure that it's all flat and well done. Even if the points don't match, I still want it just well done. Make sure that there's no holes in the quilt, anything like that. Then I need to make my backing. And gosh, I said this was what, 27 1/4. So 27 1/4 time, I mean, round that up to 30. So that's a good 60 inch, probably to 70 inch tall back. So to make my backing, I can either get like 108 wide fabric, and Art Gallery Fabrics makes some 108 wide fabrics now, so that's awesome. So I could get some 108 wide fabric to put on the back of this, or I can measure the top. So this is, looks like 24.5, give or take. So let's call it 25 inches. And then I'll add 8 inches to that. So that'll bring me to 33 inches. So I'll just need two 33-inch wide pieces of fabric, and I'll stitch one and then another. And that will get me my height that I need. So it'll be two pieces of fabric like this and like this. That'll give me the height that I need to be able to have my backing. And I can either send that off to a long armor or I can quilt it myself. Either way. If you are looking to quilt something yourself, I have a video on quilting large quilts, just tips for how to work with quilting large quilts underneath a regular domestic sewing machine. I do that on my Baby Lock Aria, not on this little jubilant though. But that's it. We are all done making this quilt. If you enjoy this, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. And make sure you subscribe to this channel. I have lots more quilting videos coming your way. Thanks so much for watching, my friends. I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.